I'm Charlie Hartsoe, Chairman of the Department of Recreation at Virginia Commonwealth University. I'd like to introduce Bob Tolson, the General Manager of the Champaign, Illinois Park District, and Robert Crawford, the recently retired Commissioner of Recreation for the City of Philadelphia and currently Executive Director of the National Recreation Foundation. Bob has completed just about 50 years of professional service in the recreation and park field. And in this program, we'd like to record some of his philosophy, some of his ideas, and some of his vision for the future for the field of recreation and parks. And Bob, could you give us a little background on how you started in this field?
When I when I graduated from the university, I became a high school teacher and coach in Iowa. And during the summer months in college, I'd worked on the playgrounds in Des Moines, Iowa, under Lewis F. Barrett, one of our old pioneers in this field. After 4 years of teaching and coaching, I was at the Drake Relays with my track team, and Mr. Barrett, who then had transferred to become the Superintendent of Recreation in Newark, New Jersey, he encountered me and he said, "Bob, are you going to coach all your life?" And I said, "Well, I haven't given much thought. It's so much fun." Well, he said, "There's a school in New York City called the National Recreation School that take 40 college graduates each year who have shown an aptitude for the field and train them in the field of public recreation. I believe it's a coming field," he said, "and I think that you should consider that as a career." And he says, as a further inducement, if you do, I will give you a job in Newark working part-time, and you'll make more money than you are teaching and coaching. And I said, "Enroll me, I'll be there." And naturally, he did. But there's one thing that happened that I didn't foresee. I fell in love with the English teacher, and we decided to get married, and I asked her if she wanted to take a chance and go to New York City with me. And in the height of depression, of course, so we both quit our jobs and off we went to New York. Before we went over to register with the National Recreation School, I thought I'd better stop and check with Mr. Barrett at his office in Newark. When I went, they said, "We've been looking all over for you. Mr. Barrett was fired last week in a political upheaval here in Newark, and therefore there'll be no job for you." That was a low point in my career. However, we did go over, my wife and I, to the National Recreation Office. We met Mr. Brocker. We met George Nesbitt, George Butler, Woody Sutherland, and a number of the other old pioneers. And they talked me into enrolling in the National Recreation School, and they would get us part-time jobs, both of us, so we could survive in New York City in the Depression. So we did. And we completed the year, and upon graduation time, one child had murdered another in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, up the Hudson, 20 miles above New York City. Mr. Brocker asked me if I would go up and make a study. They wanted someone to make a study of it and see what they should do because of this terrible crime that had happened in this community. So I went up, and to make a long story short, I recommended they have a full-time recreation department, and fortunately, they selected me as the director. And that's how I got started.
Well, so you really began your first job as a director of a one-man department, to where you were the jack of all trades, I guess. How important was that in your training?
I consider that very important because you have to do everything. Nothing happens unless you do it. You have to be the prime mover, all the way from taking down the playground equipment, which we did in those days, at the end of the summer, organizing activities, everything you did. Write the publicity, no publicity in the paper unless you would write it up. And I think that all those tasks that I had to do strengthened me for later on in my career.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Crawford, I've heard a lot about the National Recreation School and many of the people that have come through that. How were they selected, and what did you do during that year that you were in the school?
They were selected first, as I said. You had to be a college graduate and show some aptitude. And the National Recreation Association, of course, had field directors all over the country, and they would point out people to the association to be approached as possible students. I told you how I got selected because Mr. Barrett was on the board of directors. And during that year, we had training, the only really specialized training in America at that time, because as you were all aware, there were few, if any, of the colleges were even given courses in the recreation curriculum as we know it today. One of the really significant things that I think that made an impact on me as a student there, they brought the outstanding leaders of America in the park and recreation field to New York City, and they would stay for a week, 2 weeks, some 3. I remember Dorothy Indras, the wonderful former director of the Milwaukee department, stayed an entire month with us. And we had, as I say, we were able to question them about the field and what's happening and what's expected of the people, and they gave us a sense of direction. Plus, we used the National Recreation, had some wonderful people on their staff. And in addition to that, they would bring in other experts. For example, you all heard and know of J.B. Nash, former superintendent of recreation in Oakland, California, the longtime dean of the Department of New York University. He was one of our professors.
Bob, from Hastings on the Hudson, you later went to Montclair, New Jersey, which was a little larger city. And while you were in Montclair, I think the time was around World War II. What happened to your career during World War II?
When I was in Montclair, New Jersey, previous to Montclair after I left Hastings, which was 1939, most people realized that we were going to get into trouble, into war. And one of the other people in our field, Charlie Crawford, came to me and said, why don't we go down and enlist? And the Navy were looking for people with our skills. So we went down and they made him a lieutenant commander and me a lieutenant. When I went home and looked at my wife, which we were expecting our second child at that time, it didn't seem the appropriate thing to do. So I wrote him a letter and I resigned my commission before I really got started. But when I went, after I was in Montclair, and as you know, they were taking everyone under 38 years of age, and I was literally drafted, although my commission in Montclair, New Jersey, said that I should be exempt, but I would not seek an exemption. I said I don't want it. And I went down, and I was selected by the Army. However, that night when I got home, Arthur T. Norham, the former director of the National Recreation School, one of the real pioneers in this field, called me from Washington because he was coming through on the way with a submarine to Europe, and he said he'd like to see me. And when I told him the story, he picked up the phone and called some admiral in Washington, and they said, you're not going to the Army, you're going into the Navy. So they made me a welfare officer, and I ended up the welfare officer for the 7th Fleet in the Pacific.
Which probably led to your career in California, which after World War II, you became superintendent of recreation in Oakland, California?
Oakland.
Yeah.
Well, when I was at Montclair, I was the president of the American Recreation Society. And as virtue of my office, I became acquainted with most of the leaders in the country. Raymond Robinson was the superintendent in Oakland, California, and he had followed J.B. Nash there. Mr. Roberts was in ill health and felt that he should retire. So they wrote me when I was in the Pacific to see if I'd be interested and if I would stop on the way back. Fortunately, we landed in San Francisco rather than we were supposed to land in Seattle, but 3 days before we were out at sea, they told us to land in San Francisco. So I did stop and talk to the board in Oakland, and As a result, I became the superintendent of Oakland, California.
For how many years were you there?
I was in Oakland 6 years.
6 years? Right.
Crawford, Charlie and I did the internship with you in Philadelphia, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit, but when I went back there, I remember Frederick Mann had a lot to you coming to Philadelphia, I believe, and you always spoke very highly of him and of some of the things that went on in Philadelphia. Could you kind of give us some background on that?
When the new charter went in voted by the voters in November of 1951 in Philadelphia, previous to that time, recreation was a bureau under welfare. And that was the status people felt in with the prisons, the House of Correction, the Youth Study Center. The voters voted overwhelmingly to make recreation an independent department on the same par with other municipal service, police, fire, welfare, health, etc. Mayor Clark appointed Frederick R. Mann, the first recreation commissioner. Mr. Mann, of course, looked around the country to see where he could get an executive who was trained in the field to come and to run the department, be the deputy commissioner and the superintendent. I was in Oakland, as you know, at the time, and he would call me on the phone, and then he invited me to come back for a weekend. I said I wasn't interested. He said, please come back. I want to talk to you. I want to seek your advice just for a weekend. Well, I came back, and there was great pressure on me, of course, to accept the job. But when I looked at the department and saw what was happening, I thought, I don't want to come back here. So I went back, and he called me up every day. And finally I thought, well, I'm at the right age. Why don't I tackle one of the largest cities? So I came back, and Mr. Mann said, now I'm only going to be the commissioner until you get acquainted, and then I'm resigning, because I have other things in mind I want to do, and the mayor would like to have me do something else. So I was back for 2.5 years, and then I became the commissioner, and I was the commissioner since 1955.
Mm-hmm.
I remember an earlier story, Bob, when Frederick Mann was trying to convince you to accept a job in Philadelphia. He put you up in a pretty nice hotel in Philadelphia, and you felt a little uncomfortable there and changed your quarters. You want to tell us that story?
Well, when I got to this suite, he had flowers and well-stocked bar, and I hadn't been used to staying in such a luxurious place, so I thought this is too expensive, and I didn't want Mr. Mann to be paying all that money, so I moved out to the YMCA to stay. So he called up, he came down, he was all excited, he thought I went back to California, and the desk clerk said, well, he said he was going to the YMCA. So right away he said, well, this is the guy we want in Philadelphia. And their salary scale at that time was not enough that I felt that I could leave Oakland and come back. So Mr. Mann said, whatever is needed, I will supplement. Of course, Mr. Mann is an industrialist, quite a wealthy man, and he paid me a bonus. He said they pay bonuses to baseball players, and why can't we pay a bonus to recreation people? So he paid me a bonus for 4 years until my salary was up to a scale that he felt was what it should be.
And I understand that he, in order to circumvent any political criticism, that he called a press conference and announced that.
Oh, it was announced, and the mayor agreed, and the managing director, and it was in the press. And now Freddie said, you couldn't take money from somebody else, but you can from me, because I'm not asking for anything. I don't want anything. I just want the city to have good leadership.
Well, Bob, when you went to Philadelphia, the city apparently had suffered, I guess, some neglect as far as recreational development. And the city had a reputation for being subjected to some political corruption and some political pressure. We hear the same things or same characteristics of our big cities today. Could you comment on some of the problems you faced when you went in?
I knew the department was really run down, and the leadership, there were not trained leadership there. So in order to be sure I called in the National Recreation Association to make a study. And their findings, there was not one well-developed recreation facility in the city, and there were few, very few college graduates, and none had been trained in this field. So I set about to make those corrections. They were the lowest paid, the recreation people of any of the municipal departments in the city. So we had to move forward on a number of fronts, and we embarked on a program to improve the facilities and to try to raise the tone of the communities in which they are placed, so that people would be proud to have a recreation or a park or any other recreational facility in their neighborhoods. We then established a program with Temple University that those people who were now working for us had to go back and take some what I felt necessary core courses, or they couldn't be promoted. And I was surprised that my workers accepted that. And they did. And then once we got on a professional basis, then it was relatively easy for me to get the salaries up to where I felt they should be.
Mr. Crawford, in this development of community pride and neighborhood pride, one of the things that you established and did a tremendous job with were the public meetings. Every time you would go in to work on a new center or to remodel one. Could you comment a little bit on, I know you had several hundred of those meetings.
There's been over 1,000 that I personally have attended, which both of you have attended those meetings. And the purpose is to consult the neighborhood as to a facility that they would like to have in their neighborhood. And there would be a rendering made, and we would say to them, no final decisions have been made. Tonight, we'll decide. You people will tell me what you want, and then I will tell you what if I think it's good or not, but whatever you want, I'm going to try to do. And I felt deeply that if I couldn't persuade them what they were asking was wrong, then I was wrong. And I would say out of those over 1,000 meetings I attended, there were only 3 or 4 or 5 at the most that I had to go back and seek a second meeting with them. And it was usually unanimous. And I just felt that it was an education for me, and I learned a lot from those people at the grassroots levels of what they would like to have and what they expected of the department. And I believe that I attribute that and also our advisory councils for a great deal of any success that we've had in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, too, that impressed me that I think you did such a tremendous job is how you handled the elected city council members, elected officials at those public meetings.
We never went to a meeting in a neighborhood without the elected official being notified of that area. And we'd urge him to come. And at the public meetings that we had, we always made the elected official from there, the councilman, the chairman of the meeting. And we've had some very humorous incidents that happened at those meetings. I wish I had time to relate some of them to you, but I'll just mention one. We had a meeting, there were 400 or 500 people there, and I presented the plan, and I'd been meeting with a small group from the neighborhood about the plans, and I knew approximately what they would like to have, and everybody seemed to be in favor, and they made a lot of comments. And just about when we were ready to take a vote, a man well-dressed in the back of the room stood up, and he said, "Commissioner, I am not in favor of what you're proposing here tonight. This is an area of the city that we're all big taxpayers here, and you're building some great facilities in other sections of the city, and I think you're shortchanging us, and we ought to have more spent in this area than some of the other areas." And he went on, and he was quite an impressive speaker, and he sat down, and before I could reply, a well-dressed lady on the front row stood up and said, "Commissioner Crawford, please don't pay any attention to what that man said. He has shown no interest whatsoever in this project until tonight. Now he's coming and raising all these doubts. It could jeopardize the whole project. And I think I know what I'm talking about because that's my husband.
How many advisory councils? I think your philosophy was that every recreation center and every major playground or park area should have a neighborhood advisory council from within that area. And then how did you coordinate all of those councils?
When I went to Philadelphia, I felt that the people in the neighborhood, the resources have to be tapped if we are going to be successful. And I got the idea of organizing what we called recreation advisory councils. And I started with 1 or 2 places to demonstrate it could be done. And the people gave me names that they felt of outstanding citizens or people that might be interested, or parents of youngsters that visit the playgrounds, or might be a businessman in the area. And they met as a council. Now, their purpose was to be the link between the community and the leadership on the playground, and to interpret the needs of the community to the leader. And the second was to be supportive, to help operate the program, including raising funds. They raised tremendous amount of funds, some of them, to further the program there at that particular playground. And it was so successful, then we organized those local units around town, and then we organized on a district. We had 10 districts in Philadelphia, recreation districts, where we had a district supervisor over each district. Then we organized the district councils, and then from that we organized the citywide recreation council. And right now they have a very dynamic woman, the president of that council, named Mary Anderson. And Mary Anderson was one of those that I tapped over 25 years ago to start the first Recreation Advisory Council at B and Olney Playground.
Those citizens groups have been very helpful to you at budget hearings and in getting support for the department over the years.
They have been tremendous help because, as you well know, elected officials are responsive to the people who elect them and their neighborhoods. Now, we have district councilmen, we have councilmen at large. Those district councilmen listen to their constituents. And I'll be very frank with you, they go around and call in their office, make appointments, and talk to them about the recreation budget.
Some of the facilities that you've developed there have really been outstanding. One of the things that I remember going with you to one of the new buildings, and it was really a beautiful facility, and you talked to me a little bit at the time that continues to stick with me, the need to make these facilities aesthetically beautiful and to put some little extra into that area.
I felt that was important, Bob, because most people, they judge by what they see. Now, a lot of them are not actually in the program themselves. And as they go by and they see a building, and if it's well maintained, or a park, or a cul-de-sac, or whatever you have, I think it has a tremendous impact on the people of the city if you can maintain your facilities. You well know, in the last few years, especially in the urban centers, they're having more and more difficulty maintaining the facilities that they have. I always feel now we reached the stage in Philadelphia, and I told the city council, I would rather have funds to maintain what we have than adding any new facilities, except in a dire necessity. And I think they fairly well bought that concept.
Mm-hmm. During the development, you did some very creative work, your staff and working under you with some playground equipment, buildings, even to the point, I think, didn't you bring some work in from Italy or some sculpture work in some of those facilities?
We tried to get the best brains that we possibly could in the country to help us in our designs, even sculptures. We have a number of sculptured pieces of bronze that were cast in Italy, and Every time I go by, they're still there. We've had some of them for a number of years. They're durable, they're attractive, and they're usable. So,
Well,
go ahead.
I want to shift for a minute to look at the concept of public recreation in Philadelphia, which I think is really an impressive, broad concept, to where not only do you provide a broad program of community centers and playgrounds and neighborhood parks and swimming pools, but you've established some very impressive relationships with the cultural and performing arts groups in Philadelphia. You manage and run the major stadiums and athletic complex there. Could you comment on the breadth of the recreation department's work?
Well, historically, of course, you know, when we first started in recreation, it was mostly playgrounds, sand play, athletics. Someone remarked one time to me that if you take away the ball and the bat from the recreation people, they wouldn't know what to do. I don't think anyone can say that anymore today in our profession, because the scope of recreation is so broad that we cut across all age groups and all types of activities. In Philadelphia, we were, as both of you know, in addition to all the recreational facilities and the playgrounds and the swimming pools and the parks, we have many of the historical shrines under the jurisdiction of the Recreation Department. Also, we have a close tie with all the private, semi-private, education, cultural, and recreational agencies in town. As a result of that, for example, last year, the Commissioner of Recreation, I was on 46 boards of directors of organizations that I mentioned, all the way from the Philadelphia Orchestra, the Art Museum, the Robin Hood Dell, the Philadelphia Opera, the Pennsylvania Ballet, and so on. This gives you a tie-up with what is really happening in the total field of recreation. And I think it's important, not that we run everything, that the Recreation Department itself, but to see that things happen in the community that give people an option of what they would like to do during their leisure hours. So recreation should be tied in with all these other agencies, public, other public agencies, private, semi-private, as I have mentioned.
Maybe we can get a shot on the new Robin Hood Dell facility that was built in Philadelphia. Could you comment on
Robin Hood Dell? That is an indoor-outdoor theater. That is the summer home of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and which we have, the directors are selected from throughout the country. We have the outstanding opera singers of the world that come there, and other artists, and we can get 15 to 20,000 people. Now, this is a unique recreation facility in that the citizens group, the Friends of the Dell, pay for half of the cost of these programs and upkeep, and the city of Philadelphia, through the Recreation Department, we contribute the other half. And this is a tremendous popular summer program in the city of Philadelphia. It's located in Fairmount Park, so it is one of our facilities. And in addition to that, Dell, we call it the Frederick R. Mann Performing Arts Center now, but we used to call it Dell West. Now, we have another Hood Dell East, we call it, and you see a picture there, and that used to be where the orchestra played, and this has been turned over completely to the Recreation Department for summer programs, big bands, ethnic programs, gospel dramas, and programs that the Recreation Department wants to put on. That is also tremendously popular, and that is conducted programs there 3 times a week during the summer. So between the 2 dells, we have programs that I would say would appeal to practically everybody in Philadelphia.
Let's shift from the cultural side over to the athletic side and take a look, if we could get the camera shifted over to the stadium complex, which I think is the largest in the country under the auspices of a recreation department.
The one that the furthest there, that is the JFK. That's where the Army and Navy was played up to last year. We have a lot of events there, concerts. For example, this summer there were 2 concerts there, which the first one was the Rolling Stones. They had 2 concerts. They had 110,000 people there at each one. We took in the Department of Recreation over $250,000 profit on those concerts. The one in the middle is the home of the Philadelphia 76, our professional basketball team, and also our Flyers, our professional hockey team. And the one nearest, the large one, that is the home of the Philadelphia Eagles and the Philadelphia Phillies. And that is one of the finest stadiums in the country. It is operated by the department. I was one of 3 people to build the stadium. They turned it over to the Recreation Department for operation. And just to show you how successful, last year it cost the Recreation Department around $2 million to operate it. And we paid bonded indebtedness, paying off the bonded indebtedness of $3,050,000. We had a surplus of $2,330,000. So I would say the stadium is self-supporting.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that and just ask if you'd comment. Like the Phillies were in the World Series last year, and the owner of the Phillies invited you to be a part of the official traveling party, and that must have been a pretty nice setup, wasn't it?
That was a great thrill, and that was the only thing that would have kept me from the Phoenix National Recreation and Parks Congress, because I have never missed, since I've been in the profession, but when Mr. Carpenter asked me to go with him to Kansas City on their private plane and wined and dined us and front rows at Kansas City and Philadelphia, I couldn't resist it. So my wife and I stayed, and we went, and we certainly enjoyed it. And they've been very kind to us, the Phillies, as has the Eagles.
I wonder if you'd show us that World Series ring that you recently got from the Phillies as a result of your work.
Yes.
With the...
Bob and Ruley Carpenter, the owners of the Phillies, just gave me this beautiful ring, World Series ring, which has diamonds on their P and over ruby background, has my name on it, and the picture of the stadium, and the score of the last game, 4-2 Philadelphia, and 1980 world champions. And I'm very proud of that ring. And
they also asked you to throw out the ball for one of the playoff games with Montreal this year.
Yes, I threw out the last ball of the playoffs with Montreal. Unfortunately, that was the game we lost. But it was a tight game, and Montreal got wonderful pitching that day. And even though our ace, Steve Carlton, was on the mound, he gave them a couple of runs, and that's all they seemed to need. Or if that hadn't happened, I think we'd have been here playing the Yankees.
Bob, let's shift from sports over to politics and talk about the fact that you worked under 5 mayors that leaned in political persuasion from the far left to the far right. Yet as an appointed recreation commissioner, you were not protected by civil service. You were subject to appointment and reappointment by the elected mayor. You survived 5 mayors. You want to comment on how you did that?
A lot of people have asked me that question, Charles, and I think, number one, I always conducted myself as a professional. I never played politics. I didn't engage in the political maneuvers at all. I wasn't identified with either party, although as a good citizen I did vote. and vote my convictions. The mayors, no mayor, I can truthfully say, has ever asked me to do anything that I felt was unprofessional or in any way unethical. And which shows to me that a professional can exist in a political climate. If he does his job, he builds strong support in the community, and those people on the city council and the mayor that others know, the best job that I could do for them, to help them, would be doing a good job, so the people would appreciate that the city is doing something worthwhile for them. And that's a lot better than me getting into politics and playing politics. And it never bothered me one iota. If one councilman who may be a Democrat or another Republican asked me to do something, if I felt it should be done, I did it. If I didn't, I would tell them.
Mr. Crawford, on the professional side of the picture, you've been one of the real top leaders in the profession for many years and started many new professional activities, one of which that got both Charlie and I to Philadelphia was the national internship with the National Recreation Association. Would you comment on how that started and you got things underway?
Dr. Paul Douglas was the one way back in those early days. He was the chairman of the personnel committee for the NRA. Woody Sutherland was the director of personnel. Both of you know Mr. Sutherland, and he came to me, Dr. Douglas, one day, and he said, Bob, he said, I got a concept that we ought to take some of the bright young people, preferably those with master's degree in the field of park and recreation, and give them a year's internship in a large department so that they could see firsthand what the problems are, what is being done. And in other words, when they go out in the field, they're more knowledgeable rather than right out of college. The idea appealed to me. So the National Recreation, Mr. Sutherland, established, their board agreed to have what they call an internship. And they would select, as I say, outstanding young men and women in the country. Fortunately, both of you, of course, were in that program. Dr. Hartsoe was the first intern that was selected. And he came to Philadelphia to work with us. And he stayed with us for a year as an internship, and he was doing such a great job, and we all liked him. I didn't want him to leave. Now, that was not the purpose, to keep the interns in the Philadelphia department. And some of our own professional people were a little bit worried about me bringing in all these interns because they were better educated than they were. And some of them got the idea that I was bringing them in and ultimately I'd replace all the top leadership in the department with these interns. That wasn't the idea. The idea was to send them out in the field. But Dr. Hartsoe stayed with us for a few years until finally he was tapped by the National Association, Joe Pendergrass, to go with them. And then, of course, he left there to get his doctorate degree and then moved on into higher education. And you came to us, I recall, and I remember vividly when you came. And I remember talking to your father and mother who came because some of the parents were a little bit concerned about the recreation profession in those early days. And I recall your father was the superintendent of schools, I believe in Dodge City, Kansas.
Correct.
And after talking to them, well, I think they felt that this really is a profession, and there's some place for a young person to go and to move up the ladder and to play a significant role in the lives of people. So we carried on. I used to take 4 a year, 4 interns, and got so that the heads of the curriculums throughout the country would call me, say we have an outstanding student, and we tried to get outstanding students to come here who were people who are going on. And I'm very proud of those young people. You are both, two, of course, are included. Many of them are played significant roles in our field and are today. And I'm very proud. I watch them carefully. It's like a family. And some of them have been in some little difficulties politically in their communities. They've talked to me, and I've helped them in every way I could. In fact, I went to talk to the board at one place about what they were doing. And they changed their ways.
You have a great number all around the country. I know the interns kind of get together, and having the opportunity to work with you was really, really great for the interns. You did comment just briefly on the initial response from the people in your staff, and I know when Charlie went, there was a little concern about the intern coming in, but over a period of years, you were able to change that around completely.
You're absolutely right, Bob, because later on, they would fight to who get the interns. They loved to have the interns come and work with them. And there was no problem at all. And they enjoyed it, and they were all very proud of the program. And my only problem was where they would be doing their various field work. As you well know, they didn't work in one area. They worked in every section of the department. They worked in the maintenance. We sent them out to Fairmont Park. They went to camp. They attended public meetings. Every meeting I went to speak or hearing before council, budget hearing, the interns were there. And then they worked at various recreation centers. I tried to get them in various sections of the community, working in various ethnic groups. So they had a good idea of the full scope of the program. And we didn't paint any rosy pictures. We had problems. They were called in. We told them. And I used to meet, as you know, every 2 or 3 weeks or so with the interns, and they would have their questions for me, and we had a good session.
Bob, with your career spanning a period of close to 50 years, you've always been optimistic about this field, and I think Bob and I both gained from that optimism and the strong feeling and commitment you had to the profession of recreation and parks. Looking at where we are today, what do you see for the future?
Well, I think that despite the incredible changes that have taken place over the years, the force that stands like a rock is human nature. The most compulsive goal for people is for self-fulfillment, identity, and respect, self-respect. Where do you get that? Now, as both of you know, statistics show from 30 to 50% of the people in America don't like what they're doing, and some even despise their jobs. So if they're going to get this self-respect, fulfillment, and identity, if they don't get it during their working hours, which most don't, then they're going to have to get it during their leisure hours. And I think that our profession, people are recognizing it more and more. I can see from the early days when I started, people, you know, sand play, small children's play, playgrounds. They understand now the scope of the field and the importance it plays in the lives of people. I would say that when I started, there was a kind of risk going into the field because it was rather political. It still exists to some degree today, but not as much as in the early days. Political payoffs people would be putting in the job. And I think as professional people, as we develop, and over the years as we have, and we have our chance to identify with local constituents and work with them and impress those at the decision-making level on the necessity of bringing professional people in the field, then the field is going to grow and develop more as a result of that. I see great opportunities. Now there's going to be some changes because our whole, the changes that are happening in our society, I don't want to go into all of them, but the number of women working, the number of one-parent families, the number of unemployment, and there's a lot of factors that are happening in our society that will affect what's going to be done in the 80s and the 90s and beyond. But the main thing is for those in our field is to stay alert to these changes and stay in touch with the grassroots level as to what is needed, what are their needs, and then try to provide it. And this is what I think is going to be the role in our department in the days ahead, and in other words, trying to improve the quality of life.
Bob, with that background, what advice would you give young people going into this field?
First, I would tell them that always conduct yourself as a professional. 2, I would be sure that I have 2 or 3 skills that I can do well. I'm familiar with many skills, but 2 or 3 that I'm almost an expert at. I would tell them to try to cultivate working through people, trying to get them to do the things that they want to do and that you want them to do. I would say, do not ever forget the local community and the people and staying in touch with them. And consult your staff. Don't be one of those that you know everything. That you'll listen to people. Cultivate the ability to listen to other people. And always remember, if you can't convince them, when you do talk about your viewpoints, then you could be wrong.
Bob, do you have any further questions?
No, I don't think so, Charlie. I've had tremendous respect for Mr. Crawford and really enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you and get some of this down on the videotape.
Well, I just want to say in closing that several people have asked me if I started over my career, would I do the same thing? And I say to them, I cannot think of one profession where you can work more closely with people than in our profession. You have an opportunity to work with people and to try and develop programs that are meaningful, that in the lives of people, and try to make an environment that's conducive to our society. Now, this is what we're really trying to do. And if we can play that kind of part, I wish I had time to tell you some stories. I just recently had a call from San Francisco. And this young man was severely handicapped. He had lost track of me. I haven't seen him for over 40-some years. And some way he went to the Oakland Recreation Department, got my name, where I was located, and called me up. His name was Bobby Bradley. Bobby Bradley was a spastic. And I can't tell you the number of times I picked up Bobby Bradley and put Band-Aids on his head and other parts of his body. And he said, Mr. Crawford, you don't know how often I've thought of you over the years. And he said, I just wanted to call you up and thank you for what you did for me. And you used to pick me up and take me to the playgrounds. He didn't live far from where we lived. And took me to a lot of activities of the recreation department. And he said, I'll never forget it. Now, here's just something that just happened the other day. Last week, I had a letter from a young man. Now he's living here in Minnesota. And I had him in Iowa on the playground. Some way he got my name, and he wrote me and said that he is trying to bring his children up in the way that we tried to work with them on the playgrounds in Des Moines, Iowa. There's a lot of wonderful stories like that. Now, a lot of times the people you're working for, they don't show appreciation. Like we're all parents here. Our children don't show it. But you wait till they get up and get married and have children of their own, and then they're going to see what you went through and how appreciative they are. Now, fortunately, our boys have always been very appreciative of what we're doing, but some youngsters are not. I think that the youngsters, as they grow and they reflect on their early, childhood, on the playgrounds, recreation centers, engaging, they're going to have pleasant memories.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bob, on behalf of Bob Tolson and myself, and I'm sure all the other interns who had the opportunity to go through the Philadelphia Department of Recreation and train under you, we certainly owe you a debt of gratitude and want to thank you for the opportunities, the experiences, and the advice that you gave us. You've continued to pick Bob and I up occasionally when we've tripped and fallen, and I think one thing that you've done for us is have as you point out, a continuing interest in our careers. And one other comment I'd like to make is that I know that you retired this year as the Commissioner of the Department of Recreation in Philadelphia. And I do know, without revealing your age on television, that you continued on as a commissioner past age 65. And when you finally decided, I'm sure through your wife's persuasion, to retire, that you still remain active and committed to this field. You've recently accepted a job as the Executive Director of the National Recreation Foundation. And I think that's probably a characteristic that's emerging in society, is that you don't end your career at 65 and you continue on. You want to comment on that?
I think you're right, Charlie, and I like to think of it more of retreading for the next phase of our life. And I think it's just a shame over the years. I'm just looking at our own profession, which most of you are familiar with a lot of the senior statesmen we had in this field, and once they're through, they're out. And no one seems to pick their brains after that. And I want to tell you that there's a lot of valuable resources in our field that are being wasted. I always felt that, Charlie, I was away past 70 when I retired, and I'd have probably still been there if it hadn't been for my wife. That she felt it was time, and she'd always say to me, "Why don't you quit before you get senile?" And but I am going to be, as you've said, active with the National Foundation, of which I'm very proud that Dr. Harso is a member of the Board of Trustees. And as a result of that, I'm the liaison with the National Park and Recreation Association. So we'll keep our interests, and also with the World Leisure Association and other organizations. And I believe that I'll always be interested in the field. And I know Nate Washington said at my farewell party, he said he'll always be the commissioner as far as Philadelphia is concerned. But it's been happy years. I haven't regretted it one iota. I do think, though, that one of the things, and we didn't touch on this at all, but one of the things I've noticed over the years, that people are being more demanding than they used to be, and probably more critical, as both of you are aware that the press is. And many times we feel they're dealing on the negative side rather than the positive. And that resulted to a large extent to what happened in the Watergates. And people want to be an investigative reporter. And that's one of the things we have to overcome, and I think it can easily be overcome, because there's so many wonderful, wonderful things being done. And it's just like some friend of yours. You don't pick out one flaw. We all have flaws. You look at their good points. And that's what we want people to look at our recreation departments throughout the country. We've got a lot of wonderful young people coming up, and I just feel that the outlook looks rosy, and I would not hesitate to tell any young people they want to have an exciting career, get into the park and recreation field.
Well, Bob, you've certainly set a wonderful example for Bob Tolson and myself and the younger people coming along to follow. And that concludes our interview with you, and we look forward to working with you closely in the years ahead.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you,
you.
Bob.